Greetings, current and potential future masters of Chaldea. My name is Empress Dawn, and I've been a master ever since the first year of the game's launch globally. I get asked a lot what my overall thoughts are about this game, and if I can recommend it. So I decided to make this video to truly answer that. Seeing as I've played since launch year, and I have experience as both a free-to-play and an occasional dolphin from time to time, I feel I have plenty of experience when it comes to answering if Fate Grand Order, the grandfather of gacha games, is worth dedicating hours to reading, or if you're better off avoiding this old fossil. To start things off, what exactly is Fate Grand Order about? Well, it's a mobile gacha visual novel styled spin-off, in quotations there, of the Fate series. A series that uses historical and fictional tales of legends and myth and brings them forth as servants. Take for example, this is Artoria. No, I don't care what the subtitles say, it's Artoria, the King of England that wields Excalibur. Why yes, she is female. Why yes, there are multiple versions of her, including the legendary Boobtoria. Saberface syndrome. You get used to it. And here is what Tamamo no Mae from Japanese Legend looks like. Nothing is really off the table when it comes to Fate. I mean, heck, look at Napoleon. Yeah, Fate loves to gender bend characters or make them drastically different to what you would expect. Normally in a Fate series, there is a holy grail war going on between 7 masters and their 7 servants. However, Fate Grand Order is different. You are the only master. You take the role of Ritsuka Fujimaru, either male or female, that you can change at any time. And you are the last master of humanity, charged with keeping humanity safe by traveling to singularities to correct drastic changes to history, and eventually Lost Belts, which is a whole other can of worms, but that's for you to find out later. As the last master of humanity, though, through the power of Gacha, you summon forth as many heroic spirits as possible to help you on your quest to save humanity's timeline, alongside your adorable Kohai Mashu. So how is the overall story of Fate Grand Order? Oh, it's absolutely fantastic! Eventually. And I have to emphasize that. It eventually gets good. See, the opening chapter where everything goes wrong at Chaldea and your time in Fuyuki is all tense and filled with dread and pretty good character moments. But as soon as the first singularity, the pacing becomes very formulaic and feels very monster of the week. Don't get me wrong, all the characters are great and fit the roles given, but the tension that was present at the start just takes a serious backseat, as there are rarely any moments where you feel a sense of panic or fear of what's going on in the story. The pacing feels much more relaxed. It's not bad per se, as it does have a few memorable moments, such as the cute bond between Euryale and the Minotaur in the Okeanos Singularity. And seeing Umu as the main star in Rome is just great. But the first 5 main chapters aren't exactly what I would call bad, just not exactly engaging either. Where as far as I remember, outside of one major standout moment in London, alongside little hints of the overall story at the end of each singularity, nothing really feels like it matters that much. Oh right, I should mention that early FGO has a bit of growing writing pains, in that they localize the characters at first to be a bit more memey. What's up, my homies? I promise you, outside of early game interludes for characters, this does get better as the game goes along. That is until the 6th singularity. Then, everything changes for the better. When Nasu, the original writer of the legendary Fate Stay Night, got involved in the writing of the story, everything gets significantly better. How the characters were portrayed, the feel of a stronger overall narrative, and above all else, the theme of fate that hooks people. Questionable morality that sticks between black and white. And finally, the tension of the story. There was barely a moment in the previous main stories where you really felt a sense of dread or went, how are we going to stop this? Once Nasu got involved, that was corrected. In the sixth singularity Camelot, characters that you were going against seemed far more merciless, and yet morally complex, such as Gawain's commitment to his king, despite knowing what he was doing was wrong. The complex civil war between the king and Ozymandias. One moment that stands out for the main character in the cast is that they nearly died from the equivalent of a meteor slamming into them. But thanks to a brave, heroic spirit, their lives were saved. And the story going forward is full of strong, standout, cinematic, and tension-filled moments like that. That is also to say the character writing improves dramatically. Bedivere in that singularity and what he does to atone for the sins of his past is a strong moment in the story that all masters remember to this day. But I don't want to spoil much more than that. However, there is one more thing I want to talk about, how much the quality of the writing and story improves with Babylonia. Without going into why it's such an epic story, I want you to take a listen to the map theme of Babylonia. Now, take a listen to when everything goes wrong. You heard it, didn't you? That's not a song of hope. That is a song of inescapable dread and despair. And the situation in the story fits that perfectly, as it being the final singularity makes sure for us to feel on the verge of losing everything. A feeling that we are on the clock to stop the final plot that would incinerate humanity. And that is situations we will find ourselves in many times in the future. And it will keep you hooked into the story. Because FGO is merciless in that you can never predict when the pacing of something, in that you are safe or are moments away from everything crumbling away. This story gets dark. Characters die, but it will always maintain its humanity with the characters and how far they are willing to do what they believe is the right course, both for the heroes and the villains. As FGO loves to make you question if what you are doing is truly the right thing, especially in the Lost Belt era of the story. I won't be talking about the characters here yet, as that deserves its own segment much later in the video. One last thing I want to note before we move on from the story section. Lost Belt 6 is one of the best fictional stories I have ever read. No, I am not kidding. And it is longer than the entire Fate Stay Night visual novel, which is over 72 hours to complete. But the world building is next level. And don't be mistaken, it is not quantity over quality. It's a true masterpiece. But don't take my word for it. RPG site themselves, who doesn't normally even talk about FGO or gachas, gave an entire page about how it was one of the best stories in video games for the year. Also, this image you see? Yeah, that's the actual size in paper sheets for the volume of Fate Grand Order Lost Belt 6 entire script. The gameplay of FGO is going to be divided into two sections. What you do during battle and what you do before battle, which will cover equipment, grinding, and choice of materials. Now, let's get into the primary gameplay. For starters, every servant has 5 cards. And since you have a 3-man team, that's 15 cards of RNG. Now, since you have 15 cards of RNG for any of the servant cards that randomize every turn, you can predict what cards you get before the 3rd turn. Every servant's cards can be any of the following: Quick, Arts, and Buster. You select your 3 cards of the 5 and go on the attack. Buster increases the general attack of the card, Quick increases the amount of crit stars, and Arts increases your ultimate gauge. Crit stars are these little stars that drop that will affect your next turn. The more crit stars you have, the more likely you are to crit with one of the 5 cards, with all 5 cards guaranteed to crit at 50 stars or more. Critical attacks deal exceptional damage, but they also increase your NP gain from that attack. When selecting your cards, if you get 3 of the same color, a la Buster, Quick, or Arts, you will perform a Buster, Quick, or Arts chain. When you do a Buster chain, all servants' damage is increased by quite a bit. When you do a Quick change, you're guaranteed to get 20 crit stars for the next turn and drop more crit stars during this turn as a result. And its Arts chain results in everyone's ultimate gauge charging up by 20% for each character involved. I tried to keep this simple, so going forward, I'll be replacing the term ultimate charge and ultimate with NP gain and NP charge. NP standing for Noble Phantasm. During battle, you have a choice of how you want to go about things, going for higher Buster damage, wanting to crit more, or safely charging your NP. And the first card you choose in your selection of 3 will affect the properties of the others slightly. For example, if you choose Buster first, all the other cards will deal slightly more damage. If you choose Quick, they drop more crit stars. And if you choose Arts, you gain more NP gain for each card. Then there is the Mighty Chain, where if you choose Buster, Arts, and Quick, all 3 effects apply to each card. Now, let's talk about the servant skills. Every servant has 3 skills which can vary across the board. Some give you attack up, boost the effectiveness of certain effects like Arts. It's all over the board depending on the servant. Now, this is the important part. Every servant's skills have a cooldown until it can be used again. This is where most of your focus will be in battle, is managing the use of these skills in combination of getting your Noble Phantasm ready. For example, let's take Merlin, who has 1 turn of invincibility, but it's on a 7-turn cooldown. You need to manage when it's best to use certain skills and when to hold off. Now let's talk about the Noble Phantasms of servants really quick. Once your NP gauge reaches 100% or more, you're able to unleash your ultimate, which can either deal damage or be a support Noble Phantasm. Support Noble Phantasms, like skills, can do a variety of things, such as giving you more crit stars, healing, invincibility for a term, etc. That's not even going into how the enemy can buff itself or debuff you. Let me put it this way. There's a lot that goes on in battles in the story, and you can't just bulldoze your way through with power. Well, you kind of can for the first story, but in Lost Belts you can't do that. You always have to be smart and thinking about your next moves. One last thing to mention is the ability to use 3 command seals that individually can restore a servant's health to max or charge their NP to max. Or if you are fully wiped out, you can use all 3 at once for a full revive with all servants' NP at max. These command seals recharge once per day, so it gets you a similar feeling of desperation and temptation to use them like Masters would in other Fate media. Recently, JP added the ability for all 3 to recharge in a day, so we are sure to get that at some point. Now, it's time to move on to what you do before battle. First, before you battle, you have to slot in your servants with a cost system at the bottom there. This is to prevent you just running a team of 5 stars and bulldozing through everything. 5 stars have the highest cost, with 4 stars and below always having lower costs the lower it goes down. Then we have craft essences of your servant's equipment before battle. They also go into the cost system. Now granted, how much you can afford in the cost system goes up as you level up. Craft essences do a variety of things, such as NP gauge starting at 15%, increased crit stars, 1-hit, evade, etc, etc. Then comes leveling up your servants and their skills through materials you get in events and stages you grind for mats. Every servant has a level cap depending on their star rarity. 5 stars mean the level cap is 50, and 4 stars are 40, and similar with lower stars. To ascend servants, you need to not only level them up, but to hit their individual level cap, and then ascend them with materials in order to do so. Once you do so, you can reach that servant's highest HP and attack stats, as well as unlock all 3 of their skills. You are technically limited in how much you can farm by your AP, which increases the higher level you are. But you also get so many apples to refill your AP that compared to something like HSR or Genshin, you can basically farm as much as you want. Quick beginner warning, you will run out of QP very quickly, so be very selective in what servants you choose to level. Now, this next part is for people that came from something like HSR, where you can just cheese things using like Acheron or the recently released Castris to just skim through every fight. Yeah, you can't do that. Let me introduce the system that keeps the game balanced and will force you to level up multiple servants. The Servant Class Advantage System. Sabers beat Lancers, Lancers beat Archers, Archers beat Sabers, Assassin beats Riders, Riders beat Casters, Casters beat Assassins, Berserkers beat everything, but are also weak to everything. In FGO, the Servant Class system works as such. If a servant has class advantage, they not only deal double damage, but also take half damage, and vice versa if they are disadvantaged. Berserkers can smash everything, but they also die to everything very quickly. With multiple servant and enemy classes to deal with, this ensures that you have to make a very diverse team of servants to handle many different situations. You can't just have one servant handle 90% of the game for you. The last thing to mention when it comes to the basics for the combat system is the Mystic Code you will select before battle, which gives you 3 spells you can use at any time with a very long cooldown. There is honestly a bit more to go into, but I'll save that for a later section of the review. One of the things I really like about the combat system that I've grown to appreciate more and more compared to a game like Honkai Star Rail is the limitations like team costs, class advantage, disadvantage system really encourages you to build a lot more diverse teams for various situations. There's a lot of thought before and during battles. And once again, I will mention this later, but there are a number of lower rarity servants that outclass even some 4 or 5 stars in ability. So a servant's rarity does not always rank how useful they are, such as Ku, a 3-star Lancer with some of the best survivability in the game, or Arash, whose kamikaze attack exceptionally helps with farming teams. And I know some are just waiting for me to talk about 3-turn farming, but that'll be in the endgame section. Up next, it's time to discuss how you get the gacha currency in the game, as well as how do dailies work. Well, you log in, and that's it. No, seriously, that's it. FGO does not have dailies, but it does have weeklies, though even I still have to use a guide for it, as it can want you to kill a specific servant with like higher divinity, Roman trait, and it's best to just use Google to figure out where to go for that kind of stuff. You also get a lot of gacha currency from just completing the main story, doing rank up quests and interlude, which I'll explain what that is later, and of course, doing events. Okay, let's talk about what I know all of you are wanting to hear my thoughts on. If you played FGO or heard of it, there is one negative trait about it that is infamous for being laughed at by the gacha community. And that would be how the gacha works. It costs 3 Saint Quartz to do 1 single, 30 Saint Quartz to do a multi of 11 summons, and servants and CEs of 3 to 5 star rarity can appear, with at least 1 4-star, either being servant or CE. 90% of the time, it's going to be a CE of higher rarity. And then there is the friend point system, where you can get 3-star or below servants to easily max NP them. The friend point system is actually a great mechanic for free-to-plays, as I mentioned earlier, that some lower rarity servants are exceptionally powerful and not to be underestimated. Seriously, they do better than even some 4-stars. As for the main gacha itself, there is a 2.1% chance to get a rate up 4-star and a 0.8% chance to get the rate up 5-star. The pity system is when you use 900 Saint Quartz, or the equivalent of 33 multis, which is almost double the pity of something like Genshin or Honkai Star Rail. There is no soft pity, so at least when you hit pity, you get the servant. As of now, if you hit pity, you cannot hit pity again. So if you want more than 1 copy of a servant because you like them, hope you have good luck and a lot of Saint Quartz. And unlike doing a multi in HSR or Genshin, where you can get a 4-star nearly every multi, no such pity exists here. There is absolutely zero way to sugarcoat this. This gacha is absolutely horrible. Double the amount of pity of other gacha games, and until recently, it didn't even have a pity system. My friend before pity was introduced spent 2,300 Saint Quartz to get Melt Lilith and failed. That is more than 50 multis. The pity being added was a blessing. And I've hit pity a few times myself, and I assure you, it is the worst feeling. Because it takes so long to hit there. By the time you hit pity, you feel so dejected and defeated. And with how long it takes to earn quartz in game, just feels awful. This is without question the single worst thing about the game. Nothing else even comes close to this. And while I have many more positives to list about this game, this is the one big negative that you should consider when it comes to this game. While I'm at it, let's talk about the monetization. There's only one, and that's buying Saint Quartz for what it lists in the shop. There's never any discount, no battle pass, no $5 monthly for Saint Quartz. All there is what you see in the shop, and the highest bundle you can get for $80 is 167 Saint Quartz, which is about 5.5 multis. To explain that in monetary terms, if you were to try to fully buy a servant from Saint Quartz alone, it would cost somewhere between $440 to $480. Oh right, I should mention that you get 1 daily pull with 1 paid Saint Quartz if you buy, so there's that. It's not really that good. The only good spot for the monetization is New Year's and anniversary events, where they not only shower you in hundreds of Saint Quartz, specifically the anniversary, but there is always a guaranteed 5-star event where you select a bundle of servants to roll for. It costs about, I think, $12 to $15, and something even free-to-plays break out a bit of money for. You do one multi, and it's guaranteed to be 1 5-star, or possibly more on the list you choose. And recently, they added Destiny Call, which is a bit more expensive with 30 paid Saint Quartz, but it lets you choose one limited 5-star servant of every class, plus extra class 2 times. And then you do one multi, and you are very likely to get a favored result. This limits your options down to 9 servants you can choose from, rather than how big guaranteed SSR can be. However, it should be noted that this is still $30 worth or so it's up to you to decide if it's worth it. Me personally, it absolutely is, because FGO's gacha is bad, and anytime you can get a 5-star guaranteed, I always take it. Alright, there are 2 things I forgot to mention. Storylock servants. These are servants that are outside of rate-up banners, cannot be summoned outside of the story banner until you get far enough in the story, such as Artoria Pendragon Altar. A 4-star, but storylock, so she can never spook you, which just plain sucks as she is absolutely a fan favorite. Alright, the story banner. The story banner is always there, but unlike other gachas where you get standard summons or such, this only takes Saint Quartz. Now why would you summon on this banner? Well, you have double the odds of getting an off-banner 4 or 5-star servant or CE. However, I would highly recommend against it. Okay, so that's the explanation of how the monetization and gacha works. And what do I think of it? It sucks. There's no way to put this, it sucks. The pity is too high, the rates are low, there's no guaranteed pity for the 4 stars. For reference, my friend got Draco on rate up after hitting pity, but never once got a single 4-star Locusta, aka the 4-star rate up servants. Not to mention story servants can be really powerful and would be nice to spook ya, but nope, only in the story banner or on rate up. Such a stupid concept. Outside of the guaranteed SSR and Destiny Call, this gacha is just horrible. With the only redeeming factor for me personally is that because the gacha animation does not spoil you at the start of a multi what you get, and how the game identifies characters being summoned with either a rainbow or gold spark, it can definitely feel the most fun. And I put that in quotations where you are using a lot of quartz, because until the multi is over, you never know what you're gonna get. But that's a personal thing that doesn't affect the quality of the gacha. Although, if you have gambling addiction problems, you should not be playing this game at all. Seriously, the gacha sucks, it's terrible, and every anniversary for FGO, I pray that they improve the gacha in some way. Now, this next note is specifically if you're playing on global. We are 2 years behind compared to FGO JP's story, which is where the whole meme of global having clairvoyance into the future, and you should absolutely take advantage of this to save for a servant you really want that comes out in the future and prepare for future events. Honestly, if I didn't have this clairvoyance, the gacha would be even more merciless than it already is, and I don't know if I'd honestly be playing. That's honestly why I recommend people playing global, because, you know, you can actually plan this stuff. Next, let's talk about the visuals, because oh boy, I got a lot to say. First off, the art style for the various servants. How do I say? They are damn good. There's not one artist, there's not 2 artists, not 3 artists. There's so many artists that collab with FGO. I don't even know how to start, but I'll try. First, we have the original artist, and I swear I'm gonna butcher every one of these names. Takeuchi Takashi?
Takeuchi Takashi.
who drew all of the original designs for Fate Stay Night, and his art you can see evolve as time goes by. Here's what Artoria looks like in the original, and here is how Castoria Berserker now looks. The art is absolutely beautiful, but I can say that for many of the other artists. I'll list a few other artists, such as the amazingly talented Wada Arco, who pretty much is solely responsible for every Fate Extraverse servant, like my top 2 servant waifus, Nero, and the amazing Tamamo, also including BB, Elizabeth Bathory, and so many more to name. One particular standout is he designed the single most horny servant in the entire verse, Kiara, which, speaking of horny, there's one artist I want to mention out of so many others. An artist that has evolved past the concepts of both male and female artists. Let me introduce the legendary Raita, famously known for her most well-known servant, Minamoto no Raiko, and one of the most well-known and sadistic lollies, Shuten Doji, which, combined with her voice, editor, play a voice clip of Shuten Doji, makes me melt for her and be extremely down bad for her, more than the poison melts her enemies. They also made Ibaraki Doji, my personal favorite berserker in the series so far. Another famous female they did is Ibuki Doji, which, yeah, this artist loves thickness. And I'm not just talking about the woman. As I said, this artist has transcended both genders when it comes to art, so behold, Kintoki, the myth, the legend, a muscular beefcake with an amazing design both berserker and rider-wise. And my personal favorite design they did, James Moriarty, with such a sleek design and such amazing expression he shows on his face in both Ascension and character sprites. It's a visual joy to my eyes every time he shows up. As one last demonstration of the various artists that show up in the game, they even got the artist behind Disgaea to do some servant art, such as Wu and Fate's Gordon Ramsay. This was just a demonstration of the various artists for the character designs and servants in-game. And that's not even to go into the craft essences, which... dude. Some of this art is so good that people will roll on the gacha just for the art. I would know, I'm one of them. And it doesn't matter if it's a 3-star, 4-star, or 5-star CE or collab art, because it's all just so good. You want to know how good? A useless CE you can get during anniversaries or New Year's is of servants in different outfits, just doing stuff like mountain climbing or drinking a soda, and yet people love it. The Craft Essence Arts has some of the best art I've seen in a gacha game, and it's just... there's so much art to go over. You've seen it all over the screen as I talk. If you love diverse art, you will love this. Now, let's talk for a quick second about the battlegrounds. In the early game, what you see on both the map and battlefield is not that good, to put it lightly. However, as the game's story progresses, you will see it start to become more and more fancy with its graphics and map designs, having far more detail in the back. For example, take a look at the first stage of Orleans Battlefield versus in the previous Lilum Harlot event. You can see the advances in the budget and graphics as the game progresses on. The same goes for story background, CG, and art. Essentially, by Epic of Remnant and beyond, you will get a lot of emotional CG pieces that really intensify the mood the game wants you to feel. You will even at times get some rare animated cutscenes. Speaking of, the same applies to the sprite art you see. At first, the characters don't have that many facial expressions for the sprites. However, as you get further and further in the stories, characters go from like having 5 facial sprites like Artoria here, versus Castoria in Avalon LaFay, where she's got so many sprites that it can't even be shown fully on screen, that you have to slide down the picture to see them all. And this is for every servant as the game progresses. The character and details of their faces get such a wider variety of motions. Now, let's talk about the big one that deserves the most attention. The playable servant you will summon yourselves. Okay, so remember what I said about the character sprites getting better as the game progresses? Well, that goes even harder for the servants themselves. When the game first launched, the attack animations were very basic and generic for almost every character. But now, well, look at how Excalibur used to look. And then look at how it looks now. These noble phantasms are so incredibly detailed and just gorgeous to look at. And many of these noble phantasms will even reference moments in the story that will just hit you with so many feels. Or they can be absolutely goofy and over the top like many Summer servants. Just look at Summer Suzuka's bouncy noble phantasm and so many others. They can be epic, they can be goofy, they can be emotional. They are just all over the place. But regardless, especially now, they look damn good. And if they don't look good now, they may later, because FGO actually does animation updates for certain characters, which can upgrade the visuals of not only their noble phantasm, but their standard attack animations. Oh, I will get to that. But first, let's talk about the character art for your servants in FGO. 4 ascensions, each with uniquely evolving art. At first, it was just a little background change along with very minor outfit changes. But I think around once Kama dropped, that significantly changed. Now we have servants not only with gorgeous ascension art, but even different outfit and forms. Now while it does not happen all the time, we have a number of servants since Kama's release that is either a different form, body, or both. Just take a look at Draco's first and second ascension versus her third ascension. It's practically an entirely new servant model. And you may think when they do this, they will still reuse the same animations. Nope. Some of these servants get new attack animations or just a new animation set as a whole. And their final ascension is usually tied to a heavy story moment, which I swear, we will get to. I want to save that for later. Speaking of, oh my gosh, these battle sprite animations are gorgeous. Some of the best 2D sprite animations I've ever seen. Space Ishtar is a living Star Wars reference. With almost every attack she does, Draco goes from using so many projectile attacks as a lolly to turning into a damn Devil May Cry character in her third ascension. And these attacks are just so full of personality. Other than some early Year 1 servants that have not had their animation updated, no 2 servants have the same moveset, unless it's a story-related reference for them to do so. And each servant has a multitude of different animations they do when they use their skills. One of my personal favorites being when Merlin uses a skill and Foe comes out and kicks him in the head. These attacks just scream of their personality, be it serious, arrogant, or just being an absolute goofball. These animations are just full of so much love put into them. Sometimes I will even go out of my way not to do the usual endgame farming, just so I can see more of these animations. One final quick note about the character art and character sprite art when it comes to characters with fan service art. I must note the devs' consideration to care for various types of players because there are 3 sprites of characters. 1 or 2 of them is usually quite fan service focused for the more sexy characters, and the same can also apply to some of the lolly character designs. Take Jack the Ripper, for example. If her natural outfit is something you don't like to see in battle, you can keep her in the first ascension with her cloak covering most of her body. Or take someone like Beast Draco, where her first sprite art shows her covered in her pretty red dress, while her second ascension shows her skin very much exposed. And you can apply this logic to nearly every character with inherent fan service appeal. So I must say, very kind of the developers to have something that pleases both the degenerates and those that like characters a little more covered up. Best of both worlds. One other thing to bring up is that the game does have outfits, and all of them are free and earned by completing certain events and the like, such as when Shinjuku came out and everyone adored the Jalter and Artoria Alter's Shinjuku outfit. And years later, they released them, or Mordred's casual outfit from Fate Apocrypha. The one trade-off is if you miss the chance to get the outfit, well, FGO takes a long time to bring them into the shop, which is something I'll address in the Endgame section. But yes, there are no paid outfits to speak of, as everyone can earn them by just playing the game. Now, let's get into the music and sound design of the game. Okay, how do I say this? It's absolutely amazing, in every sense of the word. This game's soundtrack almost always fits the situation of the tone it wants you to feel. I don't really know how to describe how good music is, so I personally think it's best if you hear for yourself the tunes that play during the story. However, the true standout is the boss themes of this game. The song you are hearing right now is the very first Grand Battle theme, which you will always hear throughout the final bosses of each part 1 Singularity. I want you to take particular note of how long the build-up is for the song, till it becomes something truly spectacular. I have found myself listening to these songs outside of playing the game so many times. Now I want you to take a listen to a few of the boss themes, and note that each of these songs have an amazing build-up to them. But if I played the entire song, the whole section here would be longer than it needs to be. So yes, as you can hear for yourself, this game's soundtrack is nothing short of fantastic. In fact, I dare say it has one of the best OSTs of any of the gachas I've played. The last thing to note is this game is Japanese voice acted with English subtitles, and it all sounds great. Granted, I don't speak Japanese, so I can't speak of the quality, but the characters have so many quirky ways of talking that many voice lines have just stuck in my head. Such as Nero's, Tamamo's, and Gilgamesh's iconic laugh, and so many more. And the sound effects are, of course, beyond on point, such as the lightsaber-like sound effects from Space Ishtar, or the incredibly satisfying sound effect from Maid Alter's NP, which, you know what? Forget describing it. Just show Maid Alter's NP. Niga-san. That is, to this day, still one of my favorite Noble Phantasms for its look, sound effects, and coolness factor. Now, we have one final thing to discuss before we get into the big reason why I still play this game to this day. Just like many other gachas, FGO has a frequent number of events that are available for usually around a 20-day period. Now, this can either be a bonus or a plus to you because 95% of the time, the events follow the exact same gameplay loop. Opening section of the story, fight, more story, and then you have to grind out battle nodes to get mats you need to progress the story. Normally, equipping CEs you either get from the gacha or the event itself, or maybe even using specific servants to increase certain drops. Now, they can change how it's gone about, such as like reach 2,500 of this material or such, or complete X mission, but it basically boils down to the same thing. Grinding battles. And this game has no auto battle function at all. So believe me when I say, these events can take a long time to get through. For example, it took me 20 hours to get through the entire story, plus grinding, of the recent FGO Arcade collab event. Now, it's not as bad as it sounds depending on your point of view. Usually, better grinding nodes open up the further you get into the event story, but these are also time-gated. However, the time spent can increase quite a bit if you don't have a way to 3-turn farm, such as I and many late-game players do. Your time in each grinding mode can double or even triple if you can't 3-turn farm it. Believe me, most event stories are absolute joys to read through. But I would be lying to you if the farming in the event did not get tedious. And if it didn't have the meta supports, I'd spend so much longer in this game. Now granted, I said a very high percentage of the time it's the same thing. But there are things like Grail fronts where the gameplay changes significantly, or even tower-like events where you use a servant and then they're on cooldown for a time until you can use them again. Doesn't happen all the time, but I thought it's worth bringing up. In conclusion for the events, a vast majority of the time, the story that comes with the event is 90% of the time great writing and storytelling. But what you have to get through to that can be absolutely tedious. Though, honestly, I still prefer this to how other gacha games like Genshin just give you a bunch of mini-games you may or may not like. At least with this, it's the same gameplay. So for me, it's tolerable most of the time. Now, one of the reasons you will want to do these events is because they can reward you what we call a welfare 4-star. Free 4-star servants that if you complete the event will be at max ascension and MP5 for maximum potential. Some of these servants can be incredibly powerful, such as the 4-star Kintoki, who even back in the second year's game release, is one of the strongest single-target riders to this day. And even Chloe is a fantastic boss killer, with her high NP and crit damage. And the same goes for the free CEs you get during the events, such as, for example, Golden Sumo, which starts you at 50% MP charge and increases your attack by 15% all around. So it's very much worth doing these events, and can exponentially increase the power of your account. For example, my first event I played through was the Fate Zero Excel event, and I got my 4-star NP5 Iris feel, and she basically carried me through quite a number of battles with the guts she provided to everyone, until she was power crept when I got Merlin. But still, these 4-star servants you get for free, they're very strong for newer players. Although, I must admit, I say these are good for new players. However, some events are story locked, meaning if you haven't caught up to the story to certain points, you can't even attempt the event and you will miss out on the rewards. Now, admittingly, FGO for the longest time had a great criticism of event awards being missable, but lately they have started to release welfare servants over time for free for those that missed out. And while we don't have it yet globally, even event CEs like Golden Sumo are being released. Which, hey, it's a much better track record than many other gacha games, where even though the event is gone, you can never get the rewards. Now, this doesn't fix the missing out on story complaint, as some of the best stories are from the events. And while the more plot important ones are being added to the shop, the only way to truly see these stories is looking up the cutscenes online, which is rather sad. Some of the summer events have the best moments that newer players just miss out on. Now, let's talk about the endgame before we get to the big reason I still play this game. Simply put, the game does not have endgame like other gachas, where you do these weekly or even monthly challenges. No, the endgame is entirely in the story itself, because the story progresses in difficulty as you go, with a significant jump in Camelot, cough Gawain, and a massive spike again in Lost Belt 5 Olympus. The story is where you will fight some of the hardest boss fights that test your team building. Thankfully, even if you cannot beat it, the game frequently gives out leyline stones to give you a full revive if you struggle, which, trust me, some of these fights you will. The other form of endgame challenge to speak of is the challenge quests in each event, where specific restrictions on your team or specific buffs to the enemy team are given. These can be very challenging, but also rather fun, as it pushes your knowledge of the game to the max. Now, that covers when it comes to the challenge aspect of endgame. But you may be wondering, what else is there to do in endgame? What do you have when you've cleared all story content? Well, you farm AP to raise your servants' bond levels. For 5-star servants, you get 3 Saint Courts for every bond level past 5. And for bond 10, you get their bond CEs, which is usually not that good, with some rare exception like Hercules and the meta supports. The bond CEs give additional lore and insight into the servants. It's nothing huge, but it is a nice reward. There is also what every single FGO player looks forward to: Nerofest or its equivalents, where you can use your AP apples to farm a majority of stuff all at once. It's a huge time sink, but just by doing one battle at the end game in a Nerofest or its equivalent, like Gilfest or such, you are farming QP, which is basically your money. You're farming embers, which you need to level up servants. You're getting multiple different mats you need for ascension and skills leveling up, and it's just the best bang for your time invested. And that's why basically every FGO player, when stuff like this comes around, they basically sink as much time into it as possible. Now again, I repeat, this game does not have auto battle, so you will be manually going through all of that, and I hope you don't ever misclick your skills. Now, I think it's time we talk about what, in my opinion, makes this game reward your love for a character more than any other gacha I've played. You are immensely rewarded for having a favorite servant that you want to constantly use no matter the circumstances. How so? Let's go down the list. You can grail your servants beyond their natural level limit up to level 100, meaning that even 3-star servants that you got as a free-to-play, it can be even higher than a 5-star. And of course, the same goes for literally any servant in the game. You can push them past 100 all the way to 120, though be warned that leveling them up to 120 takes a lot more EXP mats compared to before, and if they're 5 stars, you need multiple NP copies. But this makes your account stand out because of how limited these grails are, and lets you feel rewarded for always wanting to use your servant. Speaking of which, this next one can take months to do naturally, but the fact it is there at all is a huge incentive to always use your favorites. For every bond level past 10 and above up to 15, you get 30 Saint Quartz. That's an entire multi. Yes, a multi's worth. Fun fact, when I was grinding the hell out of one particular event with major bond point bonuses, I got my Melusine to bond 12, got a multi, and with that, I was finally able to get my last copy of her for NP5. I cannot stress how much internally you will feel rewarded for players like me that get attached to my favorites such as Melusine and Tamamo. It encourages me to always bring them, and I'm rewarded for that love. I scrolled over it, but there are foes you can give to your servants for increasing HP and attack stats. These are very easy to come by, and you can give many to many different servants. However, the gold foes are far more rare, only giving plus 20 stats to HP and attack individually past the regular foes. And you only get around 3 for each attack and HP, each event upon completion. This is yet another way you can power up your favorites with this incredibly limited resource. It will take a long time, but seeing your favorites with 2,000 extra HP and attack compared to the servants that have only an extra 1,000, so very satisfying. Now, we don't have this in NA yet, but recently, JP introduced the ability to create your own Grand Servant using your favorite servants, which again, further rewards your love for the characters. Now, this is something I don't know much about myself, admittingly, because I try to avoid spoilers, but in Ordeal Call, which we are getting very soon, a new mechanic is introduced that I believe if you level up a whole bunch of servants in the same class, like Lancer, you can increase like the personal stats of Lancers. Don't quote me on that, and I'm not willing to look it up because I don't want to be spoiled by Ordeal Call, but I'm just saying that the game continues to evolve in rewarding you for having favorites and collecting a bunch of servants. If you want to go even further than that, we can go into command card enhancements, which are quite pricey to upgrade and also not nearly as available as other mats, but this can slightly increase the power of your servant's individual cards to deal more damage. The last thing I'll mention on this front is just looking at your servants. They will have a grail icon on their ascension art if you grail them. Seeing them at naturally higher levels than the rest of your servants, it just feels personal. You get to see your favorite characters stand up and beyond even the most meta servants if you truly invest into them that hard. One such example is Chloe von Einsburn being my favorite archer. She's at level 100, gold, and attack foe bond 11, compared to the far more meta-relevant Gilgamesh. Why is that? Because I simply love her far more than Gilgamesh. And with that, it's time we finally get into why I still play this game, and to this day, despite all its flaws, grindy nature, and insanely cruel gacha system, I still absolutely adore playing. The heart and soul of this game has been and always will be the characters. I can't think of any other gacha game I've played with as strong and diverse a character set as the characters we have in Fate Grand Order. But first things first. The bigger a Fate fan you are, the more you will be rewarded when you play Fate Grand Order, as it deeply respects where all the various characters from the different anime, visual novels, or manga come from, with too many references to prior material or added character development to count. For example, in the Fate Zero event, which was fantastic for someone like me who adores Fate Zero, it twisted a number of things on its head. Such as, instead of Kiritsugu and Irisfield being together, instead they were separated as a master of the Holy Grail War, and one essentially took the same route Emiya took. Assassin Kiritsugu did not even know who Irisfield was, yet for some reason, he felt something for her. And Irisfield even more so, which goes even further with his final Ascension art, that shows even Kiritsugu himself does not know. Irisfield's spirit and love is always watching over him. And that is just one example of how this game respects the lore these characters come from across the vast Fate multiverse. I had to get that out of the way because the characters. I honestly don't know where to begin and give them justice, but I will try my best. Fate Grand Order has some of the best character arcs I've seen in any gacha game. Every story chapter or event always has one or two characters that pretty much join you throughout almost the entire journey, and they may act one specific way at the start, rejecting a number of things. But by the end, they come out a much better character, accepting of their flaws, and embracing things they considered worthless before. And even for the characters that don't make it all the way to the end of a story chapter, they have absolutely amazing highlights. Just to name a few, is of the legendary Leonidas in Babylonia and his great sacrifice to keep Gorgon away. Oh yeah, because of how heroic spirits work, you are going to see a lot of sacrificial action done to protect you, the player, or civilians and the like, and they are just gone from that story arc. Sure, you will still see them at Chaldea, but there are specific servants summoned in such a way where if they sacrifice themselves, they may not even maintain the memories of the story at Chaldea, and it rips at your heartstrings. Now, that's not to say that FGO cannot be funny either, because, oh, it absolutely can. The game has made me burst a gut laughing so many times before. One of the highlights of that being FGO Summer 3 with Summer Jolter. Jolter at the start of the game was basically just an edgy version of John, but throughout multiple events, developed into her own unique character that basically has nothing to do with John character-wise. In Summer 3, Jolter's spirit origin is turned into Summer Berserker, and you will never guess what her primary motivator is in that form. It's to prove that she can write a damn good doujinshi or manga story at ServantCon, primarily to prove her individuality to her own original counterpart, John. This turns into a bitter rivalry on her part as she goes through the entire process of learning to read and write stories because she was so greatly inspired by a manga she read that she didn't even know at the time was done by John. And what adds to this story is John's own summer spirit origin, which makes her far more free-spirited and nowhere near as tightly wound down as her original self, calling Jolter and Jolter Lily her family and little sisters, claiming how much Big Sis loves and will protect them, much to Jolter's annoyance. However, when Jolter finds out that John was also participating in ServantCon for writing doujinshi and manga, this ignites her out of pure spite and jealousy to be able to write a better manga than she can. And it's such a sharp contrast to how she was first introduced in the first chapter of the game, just as basically bitchy John. We see her struggle with losing sleep, coming up with ideas, seeking out the advice of other manga writers, among other ServantCon, and even going out to observe other people to get ideas for her story. Like, the entire way she takes it seriously is really admirable and both rather funny because she's still got her fiery attitude that people love Jolter for. Her story was so personal, funny, and engaging to watch through that Jolter became a character who, before I had barely any interest in, to one of my favorite characters. Thank goodness she was the free welfare of that event. Another fun interaction to name that sticks in my memory is when Blackbeard, an in-universe lolicon, is trying to hang out with Ilya and Miyu, and Emiya Assassin, despite claiming to not know these girls, still feels unwell at seeing them unguarded throughout the mini-story arc, and secretly stalks them to make sure they are protected. And when Blackbeard tries to lure the unassuming Ilya, Miyu, and even Irisfield to come with him, Assassin Emiya asks you as his master to aid in teaching this man a lesson, and you beat the crap out of him. Considering how messed up Kiritsugu's life was in Fate Zero, getting to see him be a secret protective papa was one of the most emotionally cathartic things for me to witness as a lover of his character. That's another thing Fate rewards you for, both your love of the multiverse and even in game. It knows you grow attached to a number of these characters, and for some of the most dark and depressing stories these characters go through, it will have an event or story that gives you either another perspective or a much happier outcome that just makes you feel good. One such example I can give is the 3 Tamlin Knights of Lost Belt 6, which every single one of them went through some heavily traumatic shit and suffered emotionally immensely, where nearly every player so badly wishes they could have had a happier outcome. Well, that wish was fulfilled with the summer event that came out 2 years later. Now, I have not played it myself, but their noble phantasms and spirit origin alone are enough to show they are having a far happier time. Barghest, who is suffering immensely from an innate desire she could not control, is now a fireman. Balbon Sith's character seems to evolve from being a spiteful bitch to actually seeming far more relaxed and reserved. Also, just look at her noble phantasm here. Yeah, that's some goofy shit. And Melusine, who always loved the idea of jetter fighter planes, gets her spirit origin changed to, instead of becoming a dragon, is now instead launching from Nemo's ship, a la launching like Top Gun, with so much battleship equipment on her, she takes to the skies and fires off missile after missile. And she's smiling and having a blast from beginning to end. And I'm not going to go into detail of what happens to them in Lost Belt 6, but this is a massive contrast where we get to see them actually having a great time and enjoying life. Now, as I earlier hinted at, Fate Grand Order can be quite humorous, but it can be and is very dark, especially in the main chapters, with themes of mental manipulation, torture through body mutilation, just to name a few. I'll list out 2 examples as I don't want to spoil too much. In the Shimosa chapter, there is something wrong with our body where we cannot do nearly as much as we normally could and are primarily cut off from Chaldea and in a cave hidden away from everyone. The protagonist is trapped and cornered by Berserker Shuten Doji, who seems to be torturing us by thrusting her hand into our chest, and the game goes into very gory detail of her hand moving around and every agonizing moment of pain that the protagonist goes through as Shuten revels in our pain. This scene lasts for a good 5 to 10 minutes and is very uncomfortable, as Shuten Doji delights in our pain as her hand twists around inside of our chest. For someone as squeamish as me, I was immensely thankful that only visual details we got of that scene was blood splatters and heartbeat sounds. I don't think I could have made it through Shimosa if FGO had Honkai Star Rail level of story presentation. This is a significant story spoiler warning for one of the main chapter interludes, the Fate Extra CCC event. But I need to talk to you about this because it shows just how dark Fate can truly get. So, Sashoin Kiara is the mastermind behind everything happening in the Fate Extra CCC event. Using her understanding of people and their emotions, she took advantage of the Seraphic's extremely rough work conditions to get people to want to do her bidding under false promises of love, even leading to other members killing each other for her sake. And Kiara used these people as discarded pawns, as she would take their very souls and trap them into the digital hell she made, using them as fuel for her plan to ascend to a godlike state. And these people in these digital forms are forced to watch the same memories on loop over and over, becoming monsters for the protagonist to defeat. And she even forces her former enemies into her sentinels to oppose the protagonist just to psychologically torture them. But one of the most messed up things she does is her contract with one of the demon god pillars that survived the ending of part 1. The demon god pillar was able to greatly increase her influence in the space and give her power she needed, but it always intended to use her as a pawn, to absorb it into herself. But that didn't happen. Kiara's understanding of people and creatures was so great that even before the demon god pillar realized it, he was being absorbed into her and losing more and more influence on her as time went by, where the only control he had over her was her small pinky. Upon realizing this, he begged for mercy, to be released free from this demonic woman. But Kiara would absorb not just his power into herself, but even his entire mind was erased inside of her. She manipulated everything behind the scenes and was one of the greatest threats that Chaldea ever faced. As one last note of how sadistic villains can be, in the final battle against Kama in the Oku event, she was easily able to defeat the protagonist, and her plan was to control the space around her completely, and was planning to make the protagonist suffer a sense of isolated space with no gravity, no air to breathe, just like being in space, but controlling it so that he would not die from it. His senses cut off in total blackness as he feels like he is suffocating in space in what feels like an unending death loop without actually killing him. Kama planned to keep him in that state, to break his willpower and make it where when she appeared to comfort him, when she knew he was broken mentally, would make Ritsuka embrace her love. Her seductive embrace after breaking them adds a layer of predatory manipulation, resonating with real-world themes of gaslighting and emotional abuse. I cannot put into words how exponentially horrifying reading this was in the event, because she was planning to break Ritsuka physically and mentally from being deprived of all senses in an endless cycle of death just to embrace Kama as dependence to escape from it. Thankfully, that's not how things went for Kama, but the fact that Kama put them through that before being saved, I don't have enough words to describe how messed up that was. By the way, I grailed both Kama and Kiara to level 100. I might be a little messed up. Alright, here is a big spoiler warning now for you. If you don't want to be spoiled on one of the most emotional moments in the game, you can skip ahead to the next section in the video. But as there is no way I can describe the emotional impact Fate Grand Order had on me personally without going into it. So if you're fine with hearing story spoilers and the impact it had on me, continue listening, or otherwise skip to the next section of the video. When I was playing through the Fate Imaginary Scramble event, there was a character called Van Gogh. This quirky little painter that was very friendly yet weird to everyone. As the event went on, I grew more and more attached to her and what she did to try to help everyone, even though her help sometimes led to things getting worse. Throughout the story, she struggles internally with wondering who she really is and if she's helping, as moments that she can't seem to control nearly puts everybody in peril, and she knows that she's a danger. But you, the main character, along with many other servants, convince her to stay, even when some other servants are trying to convince you to throw her out because of how dangerous she is and the problems she causes. This comes to a head near the story's climax, where she discovers that her true identity is that she's a servant of the unknown god, trying to attack Chaldea, and that she will bring disaster wherever she goes. With this knowledge, she resigns herself to her fate and becomes an instrument for the unknown god, leaving Chaldea and going over to their side to fill her role as she truly feels helpless in her fate. Even though when there, she attempts to sabotage the unknown god's plan and use herself as a sacrifice to stop them. However, everyone else refuses to just leave her to that. And in the most touching scene in the game, Ritsuka and all the other servants remind her of her kindness, the painting she does, and the joy she brought to others. And Nemo asks you, "What is your name?" Giving her the choice to choose between the servant of the unknown god or the Van Gogh everybody knows and wants back despite knowing what she truly is. And when Nemo demanded that she identify herself, and she answered as Van Gogh, I just broke down in tears. It was such a touching scene that I could not help but sob as I read this story, as I'm sure I'm about to be doing now. One other particularly strong moment in FGO came in Lost Belt 4, where in order to defeat the enemy, they had to send a character so far back in time, thousands of years. They were tasked with a simple request: to wait for them to reach them in the present. They needed something that the Lost Belt ruler had no control over to stand a chance of defeating him. And the only way to do that was to go back in time, before time even existed in this Lost Belt. However, this was no simple task, as the person who would do this would suffer in isolation for thousands of years alone, with no hope of escape, and would surely go mad. And Jinako hesitantly offers to do it, with Karna, her precious servant from another game, having faith in her. Even though Jinako considers herself mostly worthless and can't contribute anything of value, Karna, the hero of charity, believes in his former master, and silently believes in her steadfast decision to make one of the biggest self-sacrifices in the entire franchise: to remain conscious in an isolated space without rest for over thousands of years. And when Jinako seals herself away, it's a deeply, deeply traumatizing experience for her. As you see her at first be like, yeah, this ain't so bad, I can just play as many games as I want. But in this long cutscene, we see her psyche break down as she loses track of time, loses track of why she's even here anymore, screaming for help, screaming that she wishes for death, to escape this and going insane from loneliness, breaking down and crying over and over for someone to be there. The game emphasizes this by showing the void looping in a cutscene again and again as Jinako loses herself in loneliness, screaming how she doesn't want to be alone, how she doesn't even know who she is anymore, and even at one point wishing to die. But she still holds on. She can't remember the details, but she knows she made a promise. She knows there are people who believe in her, and she somehow, some way, continues to stay conscious in a fate worse than death. A fate I can't even begin to imagine. She holds on through her strong willpower and desire to keep her promises to the people that finally believed in her. this is why I continue to play Fate Grand Order. I don't know history of the world that well. I don't know the legends that I'm sure greatly enhances the experience. But the characters, despite all the prior knowledge I'm missing, are the heart and soul of this game that keep me coming back. It truly highlights both the best parts of humanity, the lighter moments between friends, the deep psychological depths villains go to, heroic sacrifices, exponential psychological horror like Jinako's sacrifice, and so much more. But that's why I keep coming back to this game. The game's events and stories never fail to make me feel emotional, be it laughing, crying, in fear, or even smiling brightly at the good conclusions. When I was a child, I was immensely attached to my Pokemon and valued them heavily. But now, as an adult, FGO has become an evolution of that for me. I love these characters. I love these stories. Sometimes I'll go into my room in-game and just listen to what my servants have to say, and I feel so deeply tied to them. Such as Iskandar being the first 5-star I got in the game. When I one day talked to him years later, he said, "Look at how much you have grown since I first knew you. How well you have developed into a respectful master and great friend." It's stupid, I know, but I suddenly just started to break down crying with a smile on my face. I know I should not, but I feel a bond with my favorite servants, and I'm always happy to use them. This isn't something I feel even closely with other gacha games I've played. Don't get me wrong. There are other gacha game stories I absolutely love, but no gacha game. No. I dare say, no game has gotten me this deeply emotionally invested into what I know is just digital PNGs, but I can't help it. The storytelling and how much they humanize these characters is just so good. And honestly, I'm sure that's how a lot of people feel about Fate Grand Order, even with how horrible the gacha is. And that's why I continue to play it, despite its flaws. It understands at its core how to touch at the human heart, and it is something no other game has done in making me feel attached to characters this deeply. That is why I continue to play Fate Grand Order as one of many masters of Chaldea. I have given you my entire experience and thoughts about FGO, so ultimately, the choice is yours if you think the negative outweighs the amazing character stories you will get. Even as someone who loves the game, I won't lie to you that it feels half as good as it is bad with how horrible the gacha is, solely from that, and how reliant the game is on meta support for 3-turn farming, otherwise it can increase the time spent in these events. However, I will say, if you have a spending or gambling problem, to not even remotely touch this game. If you have difficulty in loving a character too much and spending to have them, I would exercise caution. Ultimately, the choice is yours. But if you choose not to play the game, I do highly encourage to still look up the stories on YouTube, as it's truly that great. This was, without question, in my mind, the longest and most passionate review I have ever done for any game, let alone a gacha game. But what can I say? I played this game for years, and I have a lot to say about it. So, this is the end of the video. So after getting this far, I'd really appreciate a like on the video and subscribing for more of my future content. I'm usually streaming other gacha games or RPGs here alongside 2D action side-scrollers. And recently, I've been getting back into streaming FGO as well. And if you want to go above and beyond, consider becoming a member of my channel and maybe joining my Ko-fi tiers in the description below. You can follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky as well, though be warned, I have no filter there, as I lean more towards loving fan service quite a bit. And also consider joining my Discord, where you can really get to know me and my anime and gaming loving community. I'd love for you to leave a comment down below of what you thought of this review. I know I talk a lot, but I just have so much to say. Is there any other game you would want to see me do a deep review like this? Maybe I could try it with Honkai Star Rail or Persona 4 Golden, as I can only do a review like this if I'm extremely passionate about it. Feel free to leave comments down below on suggestions, and maybe this will evolve into a new type of video I start doing for things going forward. Who knows what my next big video will be. Maybe you can give me other ideas. That's it for me. Bye!